Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this IFMI Digital Masterclass on the 15th of April 2020. The Digital Masterclass has as title How to Secure Fleet Management Continuity in Times of COVID-19. You can imagine that this is the topic that we need to talk about in these very challenging times. So, the IFMI is the educational platform of Fleet Europe, together with the biggest fleet management and leasing companies in Europe, LeasePlan, ALD, Arval and Athlon, and supported by SEAT. This year we will have 2 digital masterclasses and 1 live masterclass, and there is also a new initiative for new starters in vehicle fleet management that we will organize later this year. But today we are going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on your vehicle fleet management. This webinar is of course for informative purposes only, because the situation is changing so fast that of course we would like to have a discussion together with experts, but it can't be that every information is probably the right information, let's say, to have implemented as a true value in your future fleet management, because the situation is changing so fast. When we look at COVID-19, we can of course say that it is something that we have never experienced before. At the moment, there are 2 million people that have tested positive on COVID-19 across the globe, with more than 125,000 deaths. This is really a shame. And you also know that all businesses are affected, with a huge impact on the economy and on society. And also our industry, the fleet, travel and mobility business, is highly impacted. There is up to 90% less air travel and car rental in some countries. There is up to 80% less public transport that we can witness. And of course, you all know that non-essential fleet business has seriously been reduced. Now, on the other side, we have seen an increase, of course, of new initiatives in digital meetings and remote working. Well, with Fleet Europe and Global Fleet, we organized a few weeks ago our first COVID-19 survey. And in total, about 400 experts, fleet managers, fleet suppliers responded to that survey. And what we are seeing in the results is some discrepancy between expectations from corporate customers and suppliers. So if we look, for example, at the job risk attitude, then we have witnessed that 70% of the suppliers say that there might be an impact for their job, while only 54% of fleet managers fear that COVID-19 has an impact on job security. When we look at cost efficiency and TCO, then fleet managers, almost 2/3 of them, are saying that there will be cost efficient opportunities. What we also are seeing is that there is, let's say, a difference in the attitude towards how the tendering exercises will continue. 80% of the suppliers fear that the customers will postpone some tenders, while only 35% of the fleet customers that have answered the survey confirm so. Electrification is something where we said, well, perhaps the electrification strategy that was put in place by many companies across the globe, many fleets, can be put on a hold due to the uncertain times. Well, there is good news. Almost 60% of the fleet customers have said to us that they will continue their green fleet strategy and electrification. And in that sense, I can also already mention that electrification will also be one of the main topics this year, at the end of the year, at the Fleet Europe Summit that we organize in Dublin. So electrification seems to be confirmed by the fleet managers as a huge topic for this year. And then finally, one of the highlights of the survey was also linked to the fleet size. Would COVID-19 have an impact on the fleet volume? Well, 70% of the suppliers fear that fleet customers will decrease their fleet this year by the end of the year, but only 30% of fleet managers see that this becomes a reality in the upcoming future. So we see that there is a difference between the expectations and between, let's say, the consequences coming from COVID-19 for the fleet supplier industry and the fleet customer industry. And so the only thing that we can recommend is that there is an efficient communication between the two parties. And therefore also this digital masterclass of the IFMI is a very good opportunity to learn a little bit more about the possible consequences and how to deal with COVID-19 and secure fleet management continuity. So therefore we are really glad that we have today among us 5 experts of the industry that would like to share a little bit more insights in how to deal with COVID-19 in terms of fleet management. You see them on the screen. We have Chidiac of ALD, Sjoerd Mouden of Arval, Mark Taylor of Athlon, Sjoerd Brenters of LeasePlan, and from the corporate fleet manager side, we have Huub Smeets of Philip Morris International. These 5 people are, let's say, they have taken the time to give you more details about how they think that you could and should deal with COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, with regard to your vehicle fleet management. And with no further ado, I would like to introduce the first session. So you will see that in this digital masterclass, we have 3 different sessions. The first one will a little bit look at what you can already do today in terms of securing fleet management continuity. The second one will a little bit more elaborate on how to deal with strategic developments that you already started and what to do in terms of this uncertainty that might be happening within your organization, also linked to your suppliers. And the third part is some insights from the field from a global fleet manager, Huub Smeets of Philip Morris International. So let's move on to the first part. It's really important that we can a little bit reflect on what you can do as a fleet manager to secure business continuity. And so Sjoerd Mouden of Arval and Mark Taylor of Athlon are going to introduce this topic with some ideas, with some insights about how to deal with fleet management continuity in times of the coronavirus. Shams and Mark, I hope that you can hear me. I know that you are in the webinar room. And so I also hope that you and your families are not personally affected by the coronavirus. And thank you very much for taking the time to share a little bit your insights with the audience. Shams, Mark, are you ready?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Stephen, for your kind words. And indeed, I think the first question we should focus on in what can I do on the short term to ensure that my fleet is continuing to work. And we thought along with Mark and the team on some key ideas to go through this period. So the first thing I think is to have reflection and look into the contract terms and mileage that you have in your current fleet with your leaseco. Essentially, your fleet will be, in most cases, likely to run less, so have less mileage. And it's important that this decrease of usage is reflected into your contract. So obviously, it aims to create immediate savings for your fleet, and on top of that, having a closer, let's say, cost match. Let's say a cost matching the real usage of your fleet. The second thing, which is extremely important, would be to extend your contract. So why extending your contract? for the simple reason is that if you have part of your fleet which were, let's say, planned to be terminated in the coming months, there's a high chance that today the OEMs are not able to deliver the cars, probably have major delays in terms of production. So in order to offset this situation, the best way and the secure way to do it is to extend the contract with your fleet. Something else could happen as well. You may have for your running fleet some maintenance, some operation you cannot delay. You may have also related to your industry and your activity, let's say a standing activity, business activity. So your drivers are still out there because they are doing things which are extremely important for the society. They still need to have some services. So it's important that at your level, you know exactly where you can get such services. Most of the subcontractors of the leasecos and so body shops and repairs, dealership, etc., are closed, but some of them are still open to be able to serve those populations which are extremely critical for the society today. So please make sure to map those available provider in your area, in the area of your drivers, in order to be sure to give the right guidance to your driver if they really need to get an operation done. But in most cases, please try to postpone as much as possible non-essential operation. And even if you have to do it, anticipate as much as possible. To continue on that part, so also ask to your leaseco if there's any amended processes in those time. As you know, the leasecos are also in the same situation as you are, so most likely to be working remotely, not to have maybe access to some document or some tools. So you maybe want to ask them as well if there's any changes in their processes in order to perform the services. Another way also to offset the fact that you getting a new car can be difficult in those times is to use more flexible solution. So short-term rental is one, but you can also use cars which were which are without any driver currently. So the pool of cars which were either let's say aimed to be terminated, you can obviously use them and reallocate it to a new driver. So that's also a good reason to extend the contract in these cases, and obviously stay in a very close contact with your provider. It's important. The situation is changing very fast, and you can have maybe good news faster if you stay in touch with your provider. So for the next question, I will hand over to Mark.
Thanks, Shams. So we're going to look briefly at our thoughts on how you should deal with your suppliers. This applies to everybody because, of course, we're all in part of the supply chain somewhere. So firstly, we think it's really important that you approach this situation as a mutual challenge. Do this in an open way, and remember that almost every company today will be being adversely affected by the situation we find ourselves in. If you work in the right way with your suppliers, you're going to optimize the chances of success. So asking your suppliers for realistic and sustainable support is definitely the best way to do this. Suppliers and clients are partners together, and everybody is going to be facing difficulties of some sort at this time. So ask your suppliers for their thoughts on the challenges you're facing, and you'll find by taking the right approach, you'll get the best advice. It's also very important to remember that any variations to the current contract terms that you have are a gift. They're not an automatic right. So making demands of suppliers isn't going to be the best way to get the support that you require. And therefore, don't be adversarial. We accept that people are under pressure. Everybody's under different pressures at this point in time. But remember that most of your suppliers are going to have the same problems that you have. And it's very probable that you're going to want to keep working together both during the crisis and after the crisis. So again, remember that all businesses are part of the supply chain, and it's now that bonds are forged or broken far more than during the good times. When things are great, it's easy. When things get challenging, people can get adversarial. But working together as partners is definitely the best way to deliver the best results for all parties. And if you're running short on liquidity and you've got vehicles that you own, you should consider whether doing a sale and leaseback might be a good option for you. And if that's the case, speak to your leasing partners if you think that that might be of interest. I'll pass you back to Shams now, who's going to talk about what you should be doing with your vehicles and your contract.
Thank you, Mark. So we mentioned that previously already, but let's try to go a bit more into the details. So when we say running a review of your fleet with your leaseco partner, we are talking essentially about having an audit of the usage of your fleet. When doing so, we will be able to identify the let's say cars or contracts which are eligible for extensions, for which it makes actual sense, and for those who will create for you immediate savings. And it's extremely important, obviously, in those times with a decrease in business activity, to have your cost under control. The other thing also will be to identify the cars which could be eventually reallocated to other drivers. Most likely before the crisis, you had recruitment process ongoing with the individuals who were to be eligible for a car. Will be extremely difficult for you to serve them and provide them with the car, with the normal, let's say, tools and services. So you might want to, let's say, to anticipate, check with your HR people which will be joining your company and will be eligible for a car, and try to look proactively within your fleet the cars which you will be able to reallocate. I think in this time of crisis, you need to change the way you monitor also your fleet and the performance of the fleet. As the situation changes extremely fast, you will need to be able to react also fast in order to optimize and let's say minimize also the impact of the crisis. And as we said also previously, try to postpone non-essential repair and maintenance. Obviously, the safety of your drivers has to remain a priority. And for those operations which actually has a real impact on the safety of the car and safety of your drivers, you can find with your leaseco some solution in order to perform those operations. But those has to be, let's say, anticipated even more than before, obviously due to the delays. We also advise not to make aggressive and quick decision. You know, let's say making this is your enemy in this situation. You want to have a rational decision and not emotional decision, and because you need also to think about the after crisis, hopefully this crisis will not last this long, and the activity will resume, and you don't want to have taken decision on the rush, which will impact the transition to the normal business activity. So this is extremely important to measure all the decision you do. The other thing is also try to prepare for the return and prepare your drivers to the return on the best practice to protect themselves and protect the vehicle. Also give them guidance. If we take an example of EVs, in a lockdown period, EVs are not or less used as well as ICE vehicle, but for EVs, you need to have a certain practice to try to minimize the damage of the battery, which would mean making sure the battery is not charged to the maximum of 80%. Could be one of them. So try to also provide those guidance to your drivers as much as possible to accompany them to this period. So to conclude on this topic on how to secure the business continuity, I will let Mark continue.
So Mark, thanks, Shams. Yeah. Thank you, Shams. So we'll have a quick look at how you can be preparing for the post-crisis period. And it's interesting that within the industry, we're already hearing the first stories of actually vehicle demand increasing in certain areas. There are several examples of that. For example, in China, where the crisis obviously started, more people are actually buying cars now because they're avoiding public transport. In Belgium, we're seeing some employers asking employees to travel to work by car rather than public transport or by typical workers' vans that are arranged by the business. In some markets, we're seeing the courier delivery companies, the last mile delivery companies, and online shopping requests increasing significantly. And we're seeing some businesses increasing van fleets themselves to organise their own collections and deliveries because of the demand. So it's not just a negative picture, there is positivity out there as well. Most fleet industry experts seem to be predicting that when the return to normality happens, this is going to be a gradual process. It's not going to be a big bang or overnight sensation as such. So we know that OEMs and distributors, dealerships, leasing companies, and all parts of the supply chain are likely to resume their activities gradually because of the long supply chains are going to have to restart. A good example of this is we already know that some OEMs have stated that they're going to delay restarting factories because of unavailability of parts. So because of this gradual return to normality and the probable issues with the supply chains, you should be aware that slower and missed production, coupled with a high demand for certain types of vehicles, may disrupt the planning that you have today. So it's important to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C effectively. You really need to think about different alternatives and scenarios that may happen as a result of this gradual return to normality. So if you're having concerns about vehicle supply issues, we would also recommend that you consider what alternative vehicles or OEMs you could use to meet this demand. So again, we would suggest taking the time now to step back from the day-to-day business to consider with the other stakeholders within fleet what those options might look like for you. And again, your lease companies will be able to support you in terms of the work around that. Also be aware that short-term rental companies are defleeting in order to protect their profit and loss. So if you're planning to use them to fill gaps, it won't be as easy as it usually is. Again, you can speak to your providers on that to understand where they are today and where they think they will be as we come out of the crisis. Also be aware that when some of your direct suppliers are back up and running, that some of their supply chain may still be having issues, which again will cause further delays. So back to the example of OEMs and parts, for example. It's probable that a number of things aren't actually going to return to the way they were before the crisis. So consider where you might be able to take some positives from the crisis that could potentially deliver longer term savings or efficiency improvements to your business. For example, Stephen mentioned earlier about the number of video conferences and conference calls taking place. Have they worked well for you? Could they permanently replace some of the face-to-face activities that you've undertaken previously, which in turn would result in less travel and therefore impact on your cost in a positive way? And did the way you worked during the crisis support your wider mobility strategy? Were employees more adaptable at this time, more open to different ways of traveling? So actually there could be some positives in terms of the mobility agenda. Also be aware that key service providers are going to see a large amount of stacking up. As Shams said a couple of minutes ago, postpone non-essential, non-urgent maintenance and repairs. So we know that missed maintenance, winter tyre changes and so on will probably push the high season well into the summer. We know that new vehicle deliveries will be delayed, as Shams said, and also collection and sale of returned lease vehicles will be delayed. So I suppose in summary, it's important that you use this time of the crisis to think about and develop your fleet strategy and engage with your other stakeholders. In the next part of the webinar, we'll discuss this in more detail. But before we do that, I'll pass you back to Stephen because I think he's got some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark and Shams, for already elaborating on how to secure business continuity in times of COVID-19. You already covered all main topics. Just a few questions that we have, and for the audience, there will be also a more longer Q&A at the end of this digital masterclass. So if you have a question for one of the experts, don't hesitate. Send your question by using the chat function in your webinar tool so that we can moderate the Q&A at the end of this engaging session. A question perhaps for Huub Smeets, the corporate fleet manager in this room, managing the global fleet of Philip Morris International. Huub, good morning. What is your main takeaway in dealing, let's say, with your suppliers, your fleet suppliers, your leasing companies, your OEMs, and so on, today in these challenging times of COVID-19? Is there something that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, good morning, Stephen and all. Basically, I would say it has been a evolving situation. And like Mark and Sean already mentioned, working closely together with your OEM and leaseco partners in these challenging days will be key, not only today to minimize the impact of the cost, minimize the overall impact on your fleet management, but also in the future when the world comes back to normal, whatever the new normal will mean. It will evolve also there. You know, if we look back in hindsight, and hindsight is only weeks ago, I traveled back from Spain on the 10th of March because I'm based in Madrid. And as you all know, Spain is heavily impacted in Europe. So I came back, let's say 1 month ago, and I started to work remotely. That was just the start. And then I got messages from lease companies and OEMs. Because what happened is that we as PMI are tendering at this moment on a global level. So you can see that the impact on those processes is basically huge. Mm-hmm. So in working with the partners who are in the tender, for instance, we have already been postponing parts of the timelines, but also been revising part of the responses. So we split basically responses into general part and into a pricing part, realizing that the pricing part basically has been put on hold at the moment because of non-deliveries, interest on residual value impact, etc., etc. So the unknown part and that part, we said, let's put that a little bit more into the back burner. So all of these things happened. Also learning that sales divisions of not only garages but also sales divisions of various OEMs really did close down and are still in lockdown in Europe. So it is challenging to work with those OEMs short term. And the first signals look that most of them will be back to business, depending on the involvement of C-19 early May. So that tells you how big that impact is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We discussed how to secure business continuity today. Huub, you also told us already that you are in a global tender process. We heard Shams telling us a little bit about electric vehicles. So, of course, global and international fleet managers are also in the situation that they are having, let's say, strategic developments on the mid and the longer term, and perhaps these are also impacted, and probably you are not always knowing exactly what you can do and what you need to do. And therefore, in the second part of this digital masterclass, we would like to deep dive a little bit more into how to secure your strategy and policy. And so therefore we have invited Chidiac of ALD and Sjoerd Brenters of LeasePlan, and they are going to detail a little bit what you can do in terms of your policy and your strategy. Good morning, Anne. Good morning, Sjoerd. I hope it's a good morning. Thank you very much for being already in this webinar room. And so the audience would like to know with me a little bit more about how to deal with strategic decisions, policy decisions. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, good morning, Steven. Thank you for the introduction. So this is Sjoerd from LeasePlan. We can go straight into the first slide, Steven. So basically on the topic of policy, moving on from today's business continuity to tomorrow's policy and strategy, basically. So what we would say is that it's always a good idea to look at your policy, obviously. This always makes sense to do, but it might be more difficult now and then in these times to really update the policy because of lacking information. I think the example by Huub just made in the tender that they are in is a really good example. There's limited access to OEM information, maybe limited access to pricing information, and that will mean you might have to postpone these type of processes and also updating your policy. I think pricing information is a very important one. A lot of uncertainty in the market around what's going to happen, maybe in terms of catalog prices of vehicles, the impact of residual value, and also the lease prices, obviously. What we intend to, or what we propose to do in terms of a crisis-proof policy, with this pressure on pricing, it's very, it might make sense to focus on pricing only, but that will obviously might impact driver satisfaction as well. So what we're saying is do not lose sight of employee satisfaction. It's easy to look at pricing only, stick to the current lease budgets, for example, but that might mean that the impact on employee satisfaction is going to be negative, of course. A second thing going forward for your policy, make sure that your contract terms, what we refer to as, are close to optimal. It's always hard, of course, to assess what the optimum contract term is. But what we mean is if your contract term is too long right now, you don't have the possibility to extend in situations like this. As we've seen in the first part, contract extensions are currently something that are very much being pushed, I think, both by clients and suppliers. So if it's too long already, you might not have the possibility to extend. We refer to it as adapt here. You might also be wanting to reduce the policy, the contract term, but in this case, it might make more sense to extend it. The third one here is that it always is good to also include the right from your side as a client to have the freedom to adjust the contract term. If you want your driver to extend or stay in the car for a little bit longer because of this situation, that should be something that you have the right to do so, and you can include that also in the policy. I think also in this case, a lot of drivers will understand if that is something that needs to be done in this situation. And the final point, looking forward in updating your policy, it's really good to have some flexibility in the policy, meaning if you have a new employee, you might give them a pool car first, a temporary car, a rental car, and also, of course, as lease suppliers, we really enjoy if you take a lease car, obviously, but if you would offer a cash alternative, that provides a lot more flexibility in situations like this. If you would have to lay someone off and they have to leave the company, you're not stuck with the car, but as the employee leaves, you're also no longer dealing with the car and the cost related to that. The question on this slide was, is it the right time to continue policy adaptation? So basically what we're saying is yes, although information might not be available at all times. So do take a look at it if it makes sense, but be careful with updating and focusing too much possibly on prices right now. And on that, we can move to the next slide, Steven. The question on this slide, is it the right time to go forward with new strategy initiatives like electrification? So it's a bit broader even than just looking at policy itself. The first point here is that, as Steven also introduced briefly on the first slide of this whole presentation, that from the survey, it showed, the Fleet Europe survey, that the majority of buyers and suppliers are anticipating some impact of this COVID-19 on their strategy. What that exactly is, that's probably the uncertainty that everybody's dealing with at the moment. You don't know. Nobody really knows. As currently the focus will be mainly on the short-term, medium-term topics. Those were covered by Mark and Shams. How to deal with the situation today, contract extensions, maybe the vehicle allocation, and like straightaway cost reductions might be higher on the agenda than the electrification strategy. But what we're saying is that this crisis does not mean, although everything may be slowed down or come to a stop in some situations, it doesn't mean that the transition to a more sustainable or even a fully electric fleet should come to a stop. If you would pause it right now for 6 months, you might not reach your ambitions or your targets. I'm aware that a lot of you have set targets for 2030 or even 2025 to move to zero emission situation in your fleet. So every delay that you attract right now obviously will continue into the future. At the same time, I'm a strong believer that the current situation might provide the right momentum for change. So what we're seeing is that we're all getting used to working from home. We're not stuck in traffic anymore. You might wonder, do we need all that office space? Do we need all that, let's say, 9 to 5 type of working? We are very much able to connect online. We're doing this webinar today. We're all working online. So that's working really well. There's a lot less need for travel. So it might give the right momentum now to think about how to work with this sustainability topic after the crisis is done. What is still true, again, and that's also what I referred to in my first slide, the impact of this crisis is uncertain in a lot of areas. And that's also true around pricing that I already mentioned. I do not know what the impact is going to be from OEMs on catalog price. Will they increase their prices? Will they be stuck with a lot of supply? Will there be more demand than supply after the crisis is over? It's really uncertain at the moment. At the same time, also from a lease supplier perspective, there's no certainty yet what and if there will be any impact on residual values, for example. So what that means is that right now, and again referring to the example by Huub from Philip Morris, is that it's really hard in this situation to get all the information in from OEMs, from leasing suppliers. So it might be difficult to update policy and continue with the strategy at the moment. But again, you might not want to lose the momentum. I still think it's a really good opportunity to get everybody on the same page. So keep that in mind. Do not put everything on pause at the moment, and try to work with the numbers and the information that you have today, I would say. So with that, I would like to hand over to Anne for the next slide.
Hello, Ant.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. Good morning.
So the last question that we had in mind for this webinar is how to face this current situation and what are the learnings that we had already so regarding COVID-19. So that's the current and still ongoing complex situation. Many levels has been identified or been used when we are discussing fleet and car policy. As explained by my colleague a few minutes ago, the key quest is to let the fleet up and running, and a few items has been discussed already. But there is no and won't be one single answer to face that situation. And as a conclusion, we have few additional tips and advice that could be kept in mind. Car policy is a moving asset. It's a live being, and it has to be checked on a regular basis, and especially during crisis situation. Your car policy should be based on two different aspects to create a real matrix. External one, which is listening to the market, the information that you will hear from your LeaseCo, from the OEMs, and that will provide you with insight on what's going on for the next release of the car, the potential options that are available on the market, and also internal ones. You need to make sure that your knowledge regarding your stakeholders is and remains accurate. Don't leave your previous strategy plan on the side of the road. Just make sure that there's a logic behind, and this logic is still valid. Your car policy should always be aligned with your global strategy, and it might need to be reshaped at some point according to the internal recovery plan that will drive your priorities. And because that situation is still evolving and will continue to evolve, you should always consider several options, contract time adjustment, mobilities option, and you need to listen to your end users' expectation and provide to your company alternatives and different scenarios. Announcement from several European governments in the last few days seems to drive us to a reopening situation. But what if there's a second round of lockdown that happen again? So even if people might to get used to a new type of working, being remotely connected to their colleague, a need for mobility, a need for a car will always be there, and you need to have the perfect knowledge at that point of time of your internal stakeholders and from your decision makers to the end users of your company. And anticipation and proactivity are the key for the success of it. So, Stephen, I'm handing back the discussion to you. I'm pretty sure that you have some questions for all of us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Sjoerd, for the insights. Well, there is one question that really is popping up in my mind. And perhaps, Sjoerd, you can start answering that question. Could it also be that due to the fact that we are now living in times of COVID-19, we are working from home, that perhaps this is also a time for fleet managers to do other fleet topics that normally perhaps they would not have time for on their daily agenda. So it could also be an opportunity perhaps in terms of strategy and policy to tackle some issues that you did not have the time for before.
Yeah, there's two sides to that story, I would say. So yes, I think if you have the time today, meaning looking at the first topics of today, you are not stuck with reallocation, uncertainty around availability of vehicles, maybe pressure on pricing. If you still have the opportunity to look a little bit broader, then you can definitely focus on updating the policy items that are maybe less related to vehicle availability, pricing, etc. So maybe more on the processes, eligibility, who gets a car, topics like that. I know from our side, at least, we have information that we can provide on that, benchmark information. So those are topics that you can still look at today going forward. Again, I think a lot of people will be focusing on other things at the moment. So I'm not sure if there really is a focus on that. But also, besides policy, like I obviously discussed, the focus around electrification, it's not the wrong time to do that. I think there's a lot that you can investigate right now in terms of the switch to electrification, for example. You can look into what the possibilities are for your drivers in terms of the possibilities around charging, the availability of vehicles, all that type of stuff. I think you can still look into today, again, if your job really allows for that in terms of timing and priorities.
Okay, thank you very much. We are now going to the final part, let's say, before the Q&A with the audience, and that is some practical insights from a global fleet manager. As announced, we have Huub Smeets, who is the Global Procurement Manager, Fleet and Travel at Philip Morris International. Huub, first of all, can you tell us how many vehicles you manage in how many countries?
Yes, I can certainly do. We have about 25,000 vehicles in over 80 countries. And Asia Pacific for us is one of the main markets. And also listening to the previous presenters on keeping the guys on the road, changing policy, more working from home, 80% of our fleet is sales related. So coming in front of a potential and existing customers. So that obviously is a huge challenge at the moment.
Okay. What can you say about how COVID-19 has impacted your personal role as a fleet manager within your organization?
Yeah, I'm responsible for both fleet and travel. So the impact is huge, as travel is basically come to a total standstill at the moment. When I talk about fleet, let's start with working remotely, working from home, like we are doing all today. I think we have a lot of capabilities here to use. The question is, will the world return back to normal as it was before? Some people say no, some people say yes, and everything is in between. If you look back in hindsight, we had 9/11, we had the huge impact of the financial crisis, and see where we were before the C-19 impact. So I personally believe that a lot of it will come back. Certainly when I talk for PMI, as I said, 80% is sales related. So that is coming back. When I look at the impact on my personally, the impact on the tenders, like I said. But I think what is the main thing, and it was also mentioned, don't jump too quickly, stay calm, and try to continue to focus on strategic elements. We have about a month ago already announced internally to extend whenever possible existing leases which came up for renewal 3 months, and we will look at that again in the week or so to come. And you have to go with the flow. If we see that the situation changes for the positive, maybe we can also change elements for the positive. But we work with partners to extend. We see a lot of differences in countries. In some of the countries, we see huge willingness of lease company partners across in countries. In some other countries, we see hesitation or sometimes denial of leasing companies for whatever reasons. So that is sometimes really a challenge. But the main impact is that we are working much closer on a day-to-day basis with the countries and try to help them to keep the business going as much as possible against a minimization of impact on vehicles in total, or also the cost impact.
One of the main topics, of course, is how to deal, let's say, with tendering exercises. We can imagine that, for example, the OEM tender specifically can be a huge challenge Is there something that you have done that you can recommend? Because, of course, many OEMs can't guarantee at the moment an efficient answer. They don't have perhaps all the availability of the cars and so on. So what is your answer to the OEM tender question?
I think the answer is go with the flow and be flexible. Treat them as partners and realize that we are all in the same boat. So the first thing is that we realize that although we gave quite a long time to respond, that based on the fact that sales divisions were closing, we needed to even extend that long period already. And we see differences in brands which only represent one brand, like Ford. They have Ford, okay, a few other ones. But if you look at Volkswagen, the situation is already more complex because they have Skoda, they have Volkswagen, they have Seat, etc., etc. So that situation, excuse me, is already more challenging. The next thing is, we all know that most of the factories are closed. What will be the impact on the deliveries? No one can say that at the moment. We see some positive news. Renault reopened, as well as Volkswagen, by the way, their factories in Wuhan last week. So production is slowly coming back to life. But when will that, what is the impact for Europe, for Asia Pacific, for Latin America, where we are all having our countries? We don't know yet. So I think go with the flow, be flexible, and be realistic.
Okay, a final question before that we open the Q&A with the audience is linked, let's say, to how you use, let's say, this time of COVID-19, perhaps to test new initiatives. So, for example, are you using perhaps the experiences of home working to see if you can introduce also more home working afterwards, new mobility solutions? Do you think that your total fleet volume can decrease in the upcoming year? What is your reflection on that?
Let me first of all say that, like I mentioned, 80% of our fleet is sales related. And a lot of people are afraid to lose their jobs. We saw that also in the survey, basically. My company has guaranteed that no one will be laid off during these times of pandemic. So I think that is a very positive thing already. We are also not changing our strategy when it comes to electrification, the green approach. We are not changing that. Short term, we do not expect a huge impact, to be honest, on the total fleet size moving forward. 80% is fleet sales related for us, and sales will come back. It is the question when. So we are extending the leases, so we are avoiding new cars coming into the fleet whenever it would have been possible already. But those are the elements we are trying to play with. Too early to say where we will end up with our swap process, because again, this is changing on, I will not say a daily basis, but it is impacting us all, and we're trying to find the best way from internal, working with suppliers, what the best way forward is.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Huub. Now, for the final part, of course, we are calling the audience. So if you have a question for our experts, you can use the chat function in this webinar room, and then you can ask your question to one of the panel members or to more than one. And I see that the first questions are coming in. There is a question perhaps for Mark to start with. It's related to electrification. So some of the people in the room have some questions around the strategy in terms of electrification, and they ask if you know if there will indeed be, let's say, sort of a problem with the supply of electric vehicles, of the batteries, and how that fleet managers need to respond to that in their upcoming strategy. Is there something that you can, based on the experience and the echoes that you hear in the industry, already share with the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. That's a very good question. I think it's inevitable, as we've alluded to throughout this webinar, that there are going to be challenging times ahead in terms of supply chains, parts, components. So to answer the question in terms of availability, I think it's likely that the availability is going to become even more of a challenge. We were already seeing and experiencing an increase in demand for EVs, obviously, as the world moves to be more sustainable, and fleet managers, lead in some cases that movement. So I think we're already seeing some shortages and long lead times, albeit against the background of more and more EVs being produced by the manufacturers, rollout of new products and so on. But I think that the over demand and the shortage of supply will only actually become more of a challenge as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. A question for Shams. It's related to the leasing companies. We also discussed it already here, that there is, let's say, the advice to see if some of the contracts you can extend in this difficult period of time. But apparently, I look at the screen because the question popped in. There is, let's say, a different approach, mixed messages. I think that also Huub referred to it, from the leasing companies in terms of the willingness to extend some of the contracts. What is the ideal approach, and what is the approach in terms of that?
Well, so I'm not sure I share, let's say, the view that there's mixed messages. I think we all agree on the fact that where it makes sense, one of the best practice to remember is to extend the contract. So just to go back to the main reason for this, first is to ensure the business continuity. If your business is, let's say, impacted, you want to have the car still on the road, and making sure you get the financial impact related to this extension. So obviously, if you extend your contract, automatically your rent will decrease. So I mean, it's a win-win situation here. So you get the car for a longer time, and you create immediate savings. So that's one of the first reason. The second reason would be to take this opportunity during the extension to also re-evaluate the contractual mileage, to relate it more to a lockdown situation where your car obviously is not running as previously. So again, this is a savings opportunity. So I think, and as Sjoerd was saying previously, if you have cars which are already within brackets quite old, it's difficult to extend the contract further. But I think for most of the fleet, you would have, let's say, a part of it which will be available for this extension. So it's important to make an audit and a review, detailed review of your fleet. But in any cases, you will only get benefits. You will mitigate risks as well, meaning by that risk of not having the car you order on time. So there's only benefit in doing this.
Okay, thank you, Shams. Going to Chidiac of ALD. Perhaps a difficult question, but also difficult questions need to be asked. A question related to, let's say, the mix of messages that customers are hearing. So on the one hand, we are talking about contract extensions. On the other hand, we are talking about short-term rental vehicles, but short-term rental companies are also defleeting. So what are, let's say, the actions that leasing companies are taking and going to take towards their customers to serve them in the best possible way and to unburden them? Anne?
Can you hear me properly now?
I hear you.
Yeah, good. The main attention that I assume all leaseco companies have at the moment is to understand the customers' needs and expectation, and to be able to align with them and to put in application the strategy that they have in place. So obviously the situation isn't clear for most of us, and not only leaseco companies, OEMs, all the markets is changing at the moment. So the main idea here is to be able to answer to customers when they have questions, to provide them with the insight as soon as we have them. And this is where the network that we have with all the OEM is crucial, and all the markets and mobility providers should pay attention and should be able to provide benchmark insight to and customers for them to support their strategy and to be able to move forward. The main target that we have is to keep their fleet keeps on running and to be able to provide the best solution, which could be flexibility, mobility, extending contract if needed. There's no one single solution. There's no one single answer to be provided, and auditing their needs, auditing their fleets is a key start for a good strategy.
Okay, thank you, Anne. And then the final comment for Huub Smeets of Philip Morris. Huub, you are managing a fleet across many continents. How do you see, let's say, the situation going forward in terms of your global fleet management?
Like I mentioned, we are really continue to focus on strategy, and strategy for us continue to means that we want to reduce our footprint when it comes to OEMs, when it comes to leasing companies, and to focus on strategic partnerships with only a few. And only a few obviously is, one will never be the answer, and 10 will also not be the answer. We need to be looking at what is best in a specific region. But for me, the main focus is strategic and partnership, and that will continue no matter if C19 is around or not.
Okay, thank you very much. We have come to the end of this first digital masterclass of the International Fleet Managers Institute in 2020. I would like to thank, of course, all the experts that we had today. Thank you very much for your time, also for your insights. As you can see on the screen, there is a recorded version that will be available later on online on our website. On our website, fleeteurope.com, you can also find the link towards the highlights and the full results of our COVID-19 survey. So then you have more information in terms of how the fleet industry is looking at the impact of COVID-19. And I can already tell you that we will do a follow-up survey in the upcoming days, because as the situation is evolving, also your expectations can evolve. And so we would like to stay up to date with your thoughts and with your experiences. The next IFMI masterclasses are on the 7th of October with a digital masterclass linked to successfully reduce your CO2 emission footprint. And on the 17th of November, we are going to Dublin in Ireland. If, and we hope all by then, everything has come down in terms of COVID-19, for the live training on how to make fleet electrification work, because we see not only in previous years, but also in these times, that electrification is still high on the agenda of many fleet managers. So in the upcoming digital masterclasses and the live masterclass, we are going to focus on green fleet and fleet electrification. Should you have a question or a remark, then you can always contact us. And so we hope to meet with you again in the upcoming initiative of the International Fleet Managers Institute. Thank you very much. Stay safe and see you next time. Bye-bye.